But he said that these boys are so fundamentally malnourished that they'll never compete on speed. It's not, their technique is incredible. It's the speed is the problem and the endurance.
Like the strength, yeah.
Because they play on bananas.
Everybody, you are very, very welcome to our tiny little corner of the internet. We are the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
We thank you for joining us for our continuing coverage of Somalia for this chapter of the Colonizers World Tour, where we're looking at Italian colonies. Either yesterday or before in the playlist, we had our Somalia 101 video. Today, we are covering our piece of art from Somalia, and we have a delightful, if confused, documentary called Men in the Arena, which is a 2015 documentary. It is available for free on Peacock here in the United States, but on lots of other platforms to rent, and not very expensive either. So I would highly recommend you do so. I think we both enjoyed this documentary if we were slightly confused and frustrated by it. It is trying to be two documentaries at once, as Dr. Kristen said in our 101. It is primarily, at the end, the story of two footballers from Somalia, Sadiq Mohammed and Saad Hussein, and their journeys to be members of the Somali national team, but also just being footballers in a country where for a time sport was banned by Al-Shabaab. And who they are and how they see themselves as Somalis. It also tries to be, in a way, a political documentary talking about the realities of Somalia in the 2010s in terms of Al-Shabaab and what they were doing, and the history of football in the country and the Civil War and all these things. And its transitions were a little whiplashy for us. But we get some really great insights, I think, into Somali people and how, even though Somalia is a very fractured nation in terms of violence, but also just inherently the Somali, ethnic Somali clans that are very, very distinct across the country. But there appears to be from this a great unifying and national love of Somali football.
Like, that's an understatement based on what we saw. Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Like, I think, I wrote at one point, like, I think these footballers know that in order to be a stable country, they have to overcome the factionalism and learn to depend on one another. This is an identity that can be fostered in some ways through football.
I wrote, boys are boys everywhere. People are proud of their country everywhere, even if they're only proud of it on the pitch.
Yeah. So, I learned a lot from this. As I said in the 101, I'm so glad that we had this video, because studying Somalia is very hard. It's hard to find positive news coming out of that country, either in the past or the present. But I loved the insight that we got from this into the realities of living in Somalia in the 2010s and what it was like under parts of the Al-Shabaab regime, but also just, the universal humanity of humans who find joy in sport and music and, know the history of their country and want to find some way to bring themselves out of it. So in the end, I was very, very happy that I watched it, and I cried a couple of times. Dr. Kristen, what did you take away? What would you like to talk about from Men in the Arena?
One of the things that stuck out to me is the national football coach talking about nutrition, which is not something that I think about a lot with athletes, because I just assume that they, like, if you're a professional athlete, you know this and you do this, and this is an oversight for me. But he said that these boys are so fundamentally malnourished that they'll never compete on speed. It's not, their technique is incredible. It's the speed is the problem and the endurance.
Like the strength, yeah.
Because they play on bananas. And I just sat there for a minute and was like, I mean, a banana's a nice snack.
Yeah, but you can't play like a full football match with like, oh, I had a banana. I'm okay.
No, and there's not enough protein for muscle building. There's not like any of that. But they're thrilled to death to have a banana.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so FIFA can take, another reason FIFA can take the World Cup and shove it is that some people are playing on $multi-million nutrition plans and some people are playing on bananas.
Yeah, I think there was a scene where, we get the, I don't even know how to pronounce it, the Kekafa tournament. It's like Central Eastern Africa Football Association tournament in 2013. And this is where we get the coach talking about nutrition for the players, and like that's one of his biggest battles. But also when they were all sitting around putting on their cleats and they were just like, covered in mud and dirt and like torn up and years old and, all this kind of stuff. I just typed like, they have such old equipment. And I'm like, how are they going to be competing with like even some of the other African nations in this tournament that have a much higher FIFA ranking when they don't even have just like proper cleats. I was like,
yeah, and
Lord.
FIFA gives money based on their FIFA ranking. And I'm like,
Yeah.
right, but the people with money don't need your money.
Yeah, I was about to say Spain is doing fine. They don't need your FIFA money. Yeah. So yeah, it was another reminder of just how corrupt FIFA is as well on a larger scale. But to frame Somalia and their hope for the future in terms of their hope for a national team was, I thought, a beautiful way to do it, because it gives you a sense of how much the conflict and famine and civil wars have impacted generations of people, but also like they just really needed a win. And they like, so we're watching the 2013 tournament and they hadn't scored a goal in like as a national team in like 4 years. And I was like, I've never wanted a goal more in my life. I was like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, because this is the paradox of football, is that you need nothing to play it. You need no money to play it. And you need an obscene amount of money to compete. And like, that's the lure of football. And that's, we even talked about that in the last chapter of the tour and when we were in Brazil, is so much. The thing that got me too about football is that it really ties people still in Somalia and the Somali diaspora. Yeah. Like, it's the only thing the diaspora has to connect to their Somaliness in a way. Yeah. They can connect to the football. So I thought that was a really interesting and really lovely point, was that this is an international unifying event for anyone who identifies as Somali.
Yeah, and it was great to have the coverage of the tournament that was being held in Kenya. And there's a lot of Somali refugees in Kenya, and displaced people and people who just moved to Kenya, because it's actually a stable economy and government, sort of. And to have them like show up, and like they were the complete underdogs in every match of this tournament, but they had so many fans, and like,
I know, it was massive.
Just like they would get a shot on goal and the whole stadium would erupt, and they had Somali flags and all this stuff. It was so beautiful. But it was such a great reminder too that like people say like, oh, sports isn't about politics, like keep your politics out of sports. And that's just ridiculous. And we talk about this all the time. Like, everything is political. Everyone is political all the time. And especially in a country where at the time, and for a time when Al-Shabaab was in control, they banned sports. They banned music and culture. They took over the national stadium for military style trainings and executions.
Yeah. And one of the African Union peacekeepers talks about how important it is they know to return the national stadium to the Somali people. And so it's still where they have their base of operations, but he's like, but we're outside so they can play football. And that was such a beautiful moment. I know there was a lot of these like small things of like, what must it be like to be a Somali? Like what kind of small, difficult ways do you have to navigate so many identities, so many things, and yet, I don't know, I'm having trouble talking about it in a certain way because the structure of the documentary, the editing, pacing cop, drove me insane. And I found it really hard to connect with a lot of the pacing and the structure and how they scripted it. And it's two white football fans who made it very apparently and who are friends with Sadiq and Sahad. And all of that's beautiful, and I loved it. But I really wish that somebody who wasn't in love with their documentary had come in to edit it a little bit more and help us tell a cohesive story. But the moments where I really got lost were the small moments, like, let's talk about bananas.
Yeah.
And the moment with the lovely actor from Captain Phillips, the Oscar-nominated actor from Captain Phillips, Barkhad Abdi. All of his talking heads were so beautiful. And also just this, like, he lives in Los Angeles, he's a working actor, but he is Somali. And he talks about us and our generation in the same way that I do for being an American older millennial. And it was just really arresting that way. And then also it was like a lovely, good, feel-good sports movie when the two boys got, scholarships and they live in the U.S. now and all of that's great.
Yeah. And I think like it was helpful for me to just, bring faces to some of the stories we're reading and following the choices that Sadiq and Saad make. And, as they're talking about this tournament, we get like the narration of Saad saying, everyone on the team has lost family members, and he just like panned every face and like introduced them, and then the family members and friends that they had lost in the civil war and the conflict. And he tells the story of when he was arrested by Al-Shabaab for breaking the law for playing football, and was held in a detention center for like 48 hours and then whipped in front of his whole community, but still played football, and still wanted to play. And but Sadiq benefits, I think, from having a friend who had emigrated to the United States, and I know I wrote down his name somewhere, but he was so delightful. Where scrolling my notes. Liban. Yeah, his friend Liban, who lives in Washington, D.C., and is able to like advocate for Sadiq as a footballer and like gets him a tryout with a college team in Florida. And I found that part really interesting too, in terms of kind of the inner workings of how you can get someone a sort of asylum for being a footballer. And he shows up and tries out for this college team, and they're like, he's phenomenal, but he's so far behind, he would never be eligible to play in NCAA. Because he like, we talked about it in our 101 in terms of how few Somalis actually go to school and how little school they actually finish. And so he had to go to this club academic team in Texas, and he was so good that he could try out and practice with the MLS team that they were under. But, not until he finishes high school and college. And so getting that insight into it, and how hard he had to work. He had to do 4 years of English in 1 year, which was just banana pants. But then also was struggling with nutrition as well. And like the doctor kept coming to him and being like, you're under, like, and he was like, oh, sometimes I don't eat breakfast or lunch. I don't really think about it. And I was like, he's used to not eating.
Yeah.
He's used to not eating and to still living and living his life without eating. But two of the best moments were when when Liban surprises him at one of his football matches and wears a scarf around his face the whole time and then pretends to be Nigerian.
Yeah, that was amazing. Oh my gosh. You thought
Sadiq,
I was Nigerian? Oh my gosh, amazing.
He was like, "Did you like my Nigerian accent?" And Sadiq's face as he's hugging his friend. And then at the end, we learn that Sadiq and Saad are eventually reunited in the United States in like 2016, 2017, because they're both then playing in the United States. And we have a link in the downstairs in our Google Doc to stories that continue to tell what's happening to these people. Sadiq and Saad are both still in the United States. Saad was eventually given, I believe, asylum.
Yes.
Because of his involvement in this film and because it brought him so much threat from Al-Shabaab, which is just banana pants, but the world that they live in and that we all live in. And we also learned that Somalia finally scored a goal in an Olympic qualifier. And I just like died. I was like, I think my takeaway from this at the end is like, I am now a Somali football supporter for life. And like, I want to go fund the renovation of their football stadium.
Yeah, I was like, do they need cleats? Do I need a GoFundMe? How can I help?
Like, are we fundraising to get them their football pitch back, please? But yeah, it as it does, it showcases how you lose entire generations in places where there is this much conflict. And, you know, in our 101, we talked about it. Somalia is just below Syria and Afghanistan in terms of numbers of refugees and displaced peoples. So when that happens, you don't really have a country anymore. Your diaspora is your country. And it's so unstable. But yet, there's still so much love for the place where they come from, and it's shown in the Somali football fans. So I doubt they've qualified for the World Cup.
I would think no.
I will endeavor to find them in their next tournament and watch some Somali football and see how if Sadiq and Saad are still playing for their national team.
This is one of the kinds of films that makes it really easy to remember that people are people everywhere. And that everyone has joys and struggles everywhere, not in a comparison conversation, just to understand the breadth and depth of humanity. Yeah. And so it's why one of the reasons we do this series is to help us understand what life is like in places that we will never travel. We won't go in person, most likely, and we would have never gone digitally without being intentional about it. And so that's why we are heading next week to somewhere I've actually been in person, to Ethiopia, where I got to spend a couple days back in the year of our Lord 2009, which is not the year it was in Ethiopia. And we will explain that next week. So please join us. If you're still interested in more Somali coverage, we've got a book review over on our sister channel, Abby Research Reads, going up on Sunday. We've got other coverage happening here on the channel. If you would like a break from Somalia, please join us for a video about Bridgerton. That'll provide a little bit of levity in our day. But mostly, our hope for you is that whatever brings you as much joy as football brings these Somali fans, we hope that it is available to you, that you can indulge in it and just relish in it, and that you can find the same sense of self-identity and groundedness in that as they do in football. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.